Welcome back to C# for Total Noobs on Developer Ramp-Up. In this lesson we'll go one step further, studying classes, and we'll play around with methods. We will see exactly what is the difference between a static method and a non-static method. Last but not least, we will try to build a new console application, a new very logical console applications that allow us to perform certain type of things. For instance, I plan that we create together a console application that resembles an ATM operation. So basically, when you go to an ATM and want to withdraw a certain sum or to deposit a certain sum of money, there is a certain type of algorithm that is going in the backend. Right now we'll try to simulate this type of application in a console application in .NET. So let's get started with Visual Studio. We are back here in our My First App solution in Visual Studio, so if you don't have it open, this would be a good way to start to pause this video and to open the solution. Here we have the class car that we have defined during the last lesson. And before we move further, I want to start with showing you, let's say, the real way developers work with classes in C#. What we noticed here is that in this namespace, My First App, we had this class program, and then immediately afterwards we have declared and worked with this class car. Now, of course, we have to say that in Visual Studio normally we have to define, or we used to define classes in their own files. So I want to show you how we can create a new file like we have here, program.cs. We will have a car.cs and we will move all that we have worked here, so all these car properties and constructors and methods and field, we'll move them to a separate file. To do that, we have to right click the project here, so My First App 10 in my case. In your case it would be My First App. If you right click it, you have here add. Then we can click here on class. A new dialog window should open just in a few seconds, where we would be able to choose that we want to create a new class. That's it. Here we have class, so this needs to be selected, and here we have to give a name. We want our class to be called car because we have already defined a car class, and it's a good thing to have the file names to contain the exact name of the class that we define also inside that file. So here we simply write car.cs, click add, and just in a few seconds we should be able to see here in a Solution Explorer this new class car. Here we can make this class public. Also sorry for the typos, and that's basically it. What we can do right now is we have a red squiggly line because we already have defined this class car here in our program.cs. What we will do right now, better we can copy everything or cut everything from here. So the entire class, including of course the specified code block, and we press Ctrl X to cut everything. Let's make this look okay once again, and we can scroll up. We go then back to this car.cs file. We will delete the default class definition that we had here, and we will paste instead everything that we have on our car class. This should do it for now. For instance, if we run this application right now, we should be able to see exactly the same behavior that we also had previously during our last course. This would take once again a few seconds until the application gets loaded for the first time, and then we should see the exact same results that we saw earlier or during the last lesson. So we see the yellow color, the red color, and the manufacturer of this car tree object, which is BMW. So that's it. Right now you know how to create your own classes in their own files. In this case we keep this class program where we have our static void main method, so basically what we execute when the console application gets started. We have it here, everything is clean. We know that here we put only things that we want to run in the console application, and everything related to the car class like properties, fields, methods, and so on are defined in a proper file called car.cs, just the same name as we had in the case of our car. So that's it. Right now we can go one step further. We said during the intro to this lesson that what we want to do is to understand exactly what static methods are and what non-static methods are. Here in this case we see that we use this getManufacturer method that simply returns a field. This field contains the manufacturer of a certain car object that we pass in using this constructor. So everything is clear till now. Since we haven't defined here if the method is static, we should add a static keyword here, and this makes a method static. Since we don't have the static keyword, this means that our method right now is non-static. What does this mean? Well, this is something that you maybe need to note down. It's really important to know. Static functions or static methods usually refer to a certain object or can be performed only on a certain object. For instance, if we go back to program.cs, we see that here where we call this method getManufacturer, we call this method on an instance of the car class, so on a specific object. If we go back to the car class and we switch this method from being non-static to being static, simply by providing this keyword here, we will already see a problem here. We will see a red squiggly line, and if we go in program.cs, we will also see here a red squiggly line. This is because normally, right now, if this method is static, this means that we can call it, or we are not allowed to call it from an object of the class. Instead, we need to call it from the class itself. So we would have to change here car manufacturer, and as you can see, we use the class and then we call the function. You can see that this is really similar to the console class, because this console writeLine method, we call it directly from the class definition, let's say. We don't call it from a console object. This is exactly the same what happens also here with our car getManufacturer method. Let's, however, try to define a little bit or play around with this type of methods to better understand what exactly happens here. We can here return as a string something that is not related to an instance of this class, so that is not directly related to a certain object. Here we could return, for instance, a text like, or a string like, for example, a car should be able to turn left, which is a thing that is really general to all cars. So it doesn't matter what object it is. This should be exact the same thing for all the objects. In this case, when we go back to program.cs, we see that everything seems to be okay. In this case, when we run this program, once again, we would see here the message that a car should be able to turn left. Once again, this is a type of information that we return from a method that really doesn't care on what, or doesn't care at all about all the car objects that we might have, like car 1, car 2, and car 3. If we go back to our car class, if we instead, for instance, want to say that a certain car or a certain manufacturer should be able to turn left, then we see that we already relate to a specific instance of this class. So we have to make this method non-static once again, and here we can say that manufacturer car should be able to turn left. Let's also use string interpolation, and that should be okay. Right now, if we run this program once again, what it would happen, it will replace this manufacturer. Oh, we have an error. Let's see exactly what this error is. An object reference is required. Because we have changed this to be a non-static, of course we need an object reference, so we want to run this on car 3. And if you run the program right now, we would expect to see the information that a BMW car should be able to turn left. And in my opinion, I think that here we show exactly what the difference between a static method and a non-static method is. Once again, when we use a non-static method like this here, when we define exactly what that method should return on this car class, we can use a reference to a certain object of this type car. But if we want to have this method static, we cannot make let's say anything, or we cannot define or use anything that is specific to only a certain object of this type. So this is why it shouldn't be, I shouldn't have removed static, and so it would be public string, and this means that the method is non-static. Let's make it static once again. That's it. Here we have to go to program.cs, and once again we have to replace here the object with the class name, so similar to what we have here with the console. In this case, once again, we get a return type that is not specific to a certain object of this class car, while when we use a non-static method, we can return things that are specific only to a certain object or to a certain instance of this class. If we run once again this program, I would expect to see once again the message that a car should be able to turn left, which is correct. So this is basically how static methods and non-static methods work. Right now I think we have covered all the major basics about classes in C#. So I would propose that we can get a little step further, and we'll try to build a new console application, a new real and functional console application that resembles an ATM transaction. So when you go basically to an ATM, you have to enter your PIN, so you get identified. Then you would be able to check your balance, you would be able to withdraw a certain amount of money, you are able to deposit a certain amount of money, and we'll try to build this type of functionality in a .NET console application. So let's get started with it. Clearly, to do this application, what we would need is a new class. What class do we need? Well, when we think about the application that we want to build, all the transactions that we want to take, like withdrawing a certain amount of money, depositing money, or querying the balance, all relate to a certain entity or mental representation that we have, that is a bank account. Therefore, what we would need to do is create a new class called bank account, and everything related to a bank account will be defined in that specific class. So we can do this once again by right-clicking the project, my first app project. There we will have the option add, and we want to add a class. We select here class. Of course, we have to provide also a name, and we said that it should be called bank account, because everything that it is related to this certain type of application is also related to a real world object, which is a bank account. So we click add. In a few seconds we see that we have our new class that was created here. What we need to do is make this class public, because we want to access it from our program class, where we have that static void main method that gets executed each time the console application gets launched. What do we need to define here? So first of all, we say that well, we want to be able to withdraw a certain amount of money or to deposit a certain amount of money, but we need also to be able to identify a certain bank account. In this case, we would try to identify it based on a PIN. So first we need a property, which is PIN. The property would be public. Let's make it int. It should be called PIN. We said that properties always need to have getters and setters. That's it, we have defined our PIN property right now. Another property that we need to have here is amount, because each type of operation that we want to perform is based on this amount, or the amount of money that we want to deposit, and so on. So we have a public string property called amount. Also we need the getter and the setter, because this is a property. Another property that we have to do is, of course, when we want to withdraw a certain amount of money or to deposit a certain amount of money, we perform this on something that we usually call balance. Therefore, also in our class we have a public property. Let's make it double this. In this case, this property should be called balance. And for the console application that we want to create, I think that this is okay for now. So we have the properties. Let's think about, do we need a constructor right now for this class? Well, I don't think that we want at this point to provide some information when we construct the object, so we can use also the default constructor. And if we don't have any other constructor specified, the default constructor is by default used by .NET, so we are not bound to also create a constructor here. Right at this point we don't need it, so we won't bother with it. As a next step, we would need to think about the operations that we want to perform based on this bank account. And the first operation that our application needs to perform is to get a PIN and to check based on the PIN that we get if the PIN is correct, or if there is a certain account that has that PIN, or if it is not correct. So in this case, what I would simply try to do is define a method that would simply, let's say, return a true if the PIN is valid, or a false if the PIN is not valid. In this case, our method would be public. It won't be static because it will refer to a certain account, to a certain bank account, because we cannot check generally if a PIN is valid. We can only check if the PIN of a specific bank account object is valid. So this is why we make this method non-static. What we want to return is a bool, because we want to return true or false. Let's name the method check if PIN is correct. We have to provide a parenthesis and the curly braces. This is the basic definition, or the basic syntax for a method. Now we have this red squiggly line because we say in this method we want to return a bool, but right now we are not returning anything. So just to get rid of this red squiggly line, we can simply call return true. We will, however, keep working on this method right now, so that when we return something, we know that well, it is really a response that checks if the PIN is correct or not. A next thing that we need is, okay, when we execute this method, we want to check if a PIN is correct, but how do we know what PIN to check? Maybe we don't define it here as a property. So what we can do here is, instead we can, when we call this method, we can say to everybody that will use this method, hey, when you call this method, you also need to provide an integer, which is PIN. Or let's make it in small letters. So this means that each time somebody wants to use this method, they would also need to provide a PIN. In this case, we can perform some basic logic here, and if we recall what we've studied when we talked about conditional statements, we just have to check if that PIN is correct or not. And we have this PIN also as property on a certain object. What we can do here is simply use an if, and as a condition we can simply define if the PIN that we receive as information when this method is called equals to the property PIN. Well, in that case we can simply return true, because it means that the PIN matches, so everything is okay. In any other case else, we return false. So that's it. Right now we have our first method that takes a PIN value, checks if the PIN is correct, so if it is really the same PIN as the property that we have here, and then it simply returns true if the PIN is correct, and it will return false if the PIN is not correct. Let's go back to our program.cs file, and here we already want to start working for this application. We will simply comment out everything here, not delete it, because you might want to refer to this type of information later, but for now we will comment it out, because when we run our ATM application, what we want to do is to display only things that are related to our ATM application and not to cars. Here we can start by console write, or let's start it differently. Let's first create an instance of a bank account. So what we would need to do is a bank account, of course. Let's name it account equals new bank account and the constructor. So we use the standard default constructor that doesn't take anything. Let's set now a PIN for this account. You can go here to PIN. Let's set it to 1234, not a PIN that you really should set in real life. Here what we would need is also a count. We would also have an amount, but right now we don't know exactly what amount of money we want to deposit, but we can already define a balance. And let's assume that we have $589.34 as our balance. Another thing that we can do is also identify a bank account not only on PIN, but it should also have attached an information about the name of the holder. So what we can do is simply add a new property, which would be public of type string. We will call it name. Of course, we need to have a getter and setter for it because it is a property. So that's it. Right now we have a new property. Then we can switch back to program.cs, and what we can define here is also the name. Account.name equals, and let's call it Dan. You can call it whatever name you want here, so there is no problem. Okay, what we want to do it right now is display a message on the console. Let's make a console right here to display this type of message. Hello, please enter your PIN. Of course, we wait then for the input of the user, and we have to read that input, transform it into an integer, and then we can use it to check if the PIN is correct. So we can have int PIN, so a variable of type PIN, because what we will need in the end is an integer. And here, as we always did, int.parse, and we parse what we get from the console, so console.readline. Right now we should have a PIN. That's the point where we can start to apply the logic that we have written in our methods. What we can do here is simply check if the PIN is correct or not. What we would need for that is a new variable called isPinCorrect. This variable would be equal to account, and here we just have to call this method, that is check if PIN is correct. We know that for this method we have to provide an integer, that is our PIN, so we already have it because we have read it from the console, so we can just pass it to this method. And right now we know that after this type of method, or this method gets executed, this variable isPinCorrect will hold either a true value or a false value. So if the PIN will be correct, we will have a true value. If the PIN is not correct, so if it is false, it will have a false value. This is the point where in our application, in our ATM application, we can make some decisions based on the value of this variable. What we can do here, of course, use another if statement, and here we can see if is PIN correct. Here it is important to note that we do not have to provide anything else in the condition. The idea that we discussed when we talked about if statements is that the condition needs to evaluate to true or false, but in our case this variable is already either true, either false, so we can just simply provide the name of the variable in here. And if this isPinCorrect is true, then what we want to do is console writeline, so we'll simply display a message to the console, and we'll call it to make it a little bit more specific, let's also use string interpolation and hello account.name. So this will use the name of this account that we have defined previously. Also we can simply use a new line but we have to do this here. And in the new line we can also say please choose what you would like to do next. And a little bit later we will provide something like a basic menu in this console application for the user to choose exactly what he or she wants to do next. If the user just wants to check the balance, or if he wants to withdraw a certain amount or deposit a certain amount of money, we'll have everything in a menu. Right now we can already test a little bit our application to see if everything is correct. So when we run it, we see this message, hello, please enter your PIN. Let's enter a PIN that we know it is correct, and you see hello Dan. So everything was fine. Please choose what you would like to do next. This is exactly what we wanted to do. If we run this application once again, and this time I provide a wrong PIN, well, it won't happen anything, of course, because we haven't defined what should happen if this is PIN correct is set to false. So we can go back here and else. Let's undo this. Okay, so else. Of course, we'll write an information to the console write line. We can simply say PIN is not correct, application stops. So that's it. Right now, if you run it again, we will try to provide a wrong PIN here once again, so 4567, and PIN is not correct, application stops. Until now our application performs just the way we would expect it to perform, and we already implemented a basic method that checks a PIN if it is true, or if the PIN is correct, or if the PIN is false. Then in our ATM application we take the information that results from this method check if PIN is correct method and use it to perform some certain type of decisions inside our applications. We'll now have to go one step further and think about what exactly we want to implement next. As a to-do list is, we can maybe use also comments here, like to do. What we need to do is create the menu in the console application, and what we also need to do is create methods for withdraw, deposit, or check balance. So this is exactly what we need to do further. Let's start with the first one on our to-do list. Creating the menu is really not a very big deal. We just have to print some things to the console. Therefore we'll use a console write, and here we will have to add some things because we want to give the user options based on numbers, so that would have to choose 1 or 2 or 3, and based on that numbers we would then perform certain types of actions. So here we have first one. The first thing to do is maybe check your balance. Then we have to add a new line, and we use this using this sequence backslash and n. This instructs the console to print everything that comes afterwards on a new line. And here what we will do here, we will press enter. When we do that, we see that Visual Studio already did some things for us. It added this plus sign and starting a new string. This means basically that these two strings will get concatenated. The second options would be then to withdraw money. So withdraw. And then we need also a new line, and we'll go next. Third option would be to deposit. That's basically it. For now I think we do not really need any other options. Let's see exactly how this would look like in the console if we run this program. First of all, we will be asked, of course, to provide our PIN number, what we'll do, and here we see hello Dan, and please choose what you would like to do next. And here we have the first option, check your balance, withdraw and deposit. That's basically it. So we are done with creating the menu. Now we have to implement the methods to perform this type of actions. So what we want to do is check your balance, we need a method for withdraw, and we will also need a method for deposit. Let's go then back to our bank account class and let's start creating these methods. The first one would be able to check balance. So it would be a public method. What we would need to return is a double because balance is double. The name of this would be check balance. Let's undo this because there is a typo there. We delete this. That's our method. So now we have only to implement it. Implementing this method is really not very difficult because what we have to do is simply return the balance property. What we can do here is then simply return balance. So that's it. Then we have to implement the next method. It would be to withdraw. So it would be public. We don't know exactly what we want to return yet, so let's let it void. We don't want to return anything for the moment, and the name would be withdraw. What we will need here is, of course, we need to know what amount do we want to withdraw. So here we could simply specify the amount, or we can for instance say exactly what we want to do here, or what amount of money do we want to withdraw. For this we need also a double, so it would be a double amount. The thing that we can do afterwards is simply we can check if there is enough if there are enough funds on the balance to withdraw this type of amount, and if yes, we can return okay, maybe the new balance, and if not, maybe return a message that says, hey, something went wrong, you don't have sufficient funds to perform this transaction. Let's try to do this. We have here to take a decision. Of course, if we have to take a decision, we can use an if statement. What would be, however, the condition that we need to evaluate? Well, of course, we need first to check that the amount that we want to withdraw is less than or equal to the current balance that we have. So we can define here that the amount should be less than or equal to balance. Only in this case we can return a successful operation. For instance, we could simply return a string success. And if this is not correct, we have a red squiggly line because we don't have any return type here, but we could add simply public and string instead of void. We want to return a string, not return anything. And if this is not correct, so if the amount is greater than the balance that we have an else condition, of course. In this case we would return insufficient funds. So that's the main logic of what we can do here. However, if we are in a situation where we can really withdraw this amount, we of course have also to perform this operation. So we have to do balance. The new balance would be equal the current balance minus amount. And then we would have basically a new balance value. What we can do here is then simply think as one step further. A way to return something from this method is using a string like success or insufficient funds, but on the other hand we could simply return also a bool, so a true if the operation was successful, and we could return a false if the operation was not successful. And I think that this would be the best way to proceed in this case, because we simply return a true or a false, and then it's up to the consumer to define exactly what he wants to do next. So let's change this, and instead of returning a string, let's also return a bool. And here we will return true, while here we will return false. So that's it. Now we have created our second method that allows us to withdraw money from our current balance. The last method that we have to implement is the deposit method. What we want to do here is make this method, of course, public, but what we want to return. Maybe the best way to proceed here is to simply return the new balance. So we would return a double. Here we would have the name deposit, and that's the method. In this case, once again, we need to know exactly the amount of money that we want to deposit to our balance. So we would need here to provide a double, which is amount. What we can do here in this method is, of course, simply just adding the amount to the current balance. So it would be balance equals balance plus amount, and we can then return the new balance. So that's basically it. There is, however, one other thing that I just wanted to show you is here we write this balance equals balance plus amount. What we could do here and achieve exactly the same result, but by writing fewer characters, is simply have balance plus equals and amount. So this means exactly that balance equals balance plus amount. And here, of course, we could do exactly the same thing, but the only thing that we need to change here is minus equals amount. So that's it. Right now we have implemented all the methods that we need for this program to work. That's the place where we can go back to this program.cs and think a little bit how we can perform certain actions. So we know here exactly that we have a menu. We know that in this menu we have only three options. So either the user chooses 1, either the user chooses 2, or either the user chooses 3. So based on this type of information, we would have once again to let's say to decide upon what we want to do next. If the user chooses 1, then we have to execute that check balance method. If the user uses 2, then we want to execute the withdraw method. And if the user uses 3, then we know that we want to execute the deposit method. And here I have added also a new line just to be consistent. So having this type of choices, the best way to proceed here is if we remember what we talked about when we analyzed conditional statements. This is really a very specific scenario where we can use a switch statement. Well, we have to know that okay, the user right now has to provide a number. So first of all, we have to get that number from the console. Here we can define this as type int option, and this would be equal to int.parse. We have to parse what we get from the console, so it's a console read line here. Right now we have this number, so here we know exactly what option the user chose, and based on this option we can construct our switch statement. So we have switch. The switch in this case is, of course, our option. And we can go ahead to implement how this switch statement should work. So case, not here, but here, just get rid of all the typos. So here we have a case 1. In case the user performs or chooses 1, we have to perform a certain type of action. And this action would be check your balance. If we go once again back to account, we see we go to the check balance method and we see that it returns a balance, so it returns a double. This is how we can work with this further in our program. So if we know that it returns a double, we can simply here define a new variable, double balance equals, and we will use account dot get balance. We will, or check balance it's called, so it's check balance. And right now we know that this balance variable will hold the real balance value that we have. In this case we can simply go ahead and print something to the console. So console.writeLine, what can we write here? We probably will also use string interpolation, so we just simply output balance and the value that we got from that check balance method, so it is balance. And we know that each statement or each case in a switch statement needs to end with a break, so just hit break here. So right now we should have a working code here. Let's see exactly what it happens. We have to run this application. We have to provide a PIN number. Let's provide a correct PIN number, and I see that I want to check my balance and hit enter. And I receive here the information about my balance. So my new balance is $589.34. So that's it. We know that this switch statement right now works. What we can do here is simply go on and implement all the other cases. So if the user chooses true, this means that we have to withdraw. And we know that this withdraw method returns a bool, or let's say a true value if the transaction was successful, but it returns a false value if the transaction was not successful. So this means that, well, what we could do here is define a new variable, which is withdraw. It is of type bool, and on this we will run the account and withdraw. What is the sum that we want to withdraw? Well, we don't know yet, but what we can do is, of course, we can ask this from the user. So we need a double dot amount equals console dot or double parse. It's similar to int parse, but in this case we need a double, so we use the parse method on a double, and here we need to read simply the value that we get from the console. So that's it. What we have, however, to add here is also an information to the user, console write line, and this information we ask the user for the amount. Please provide the amount you want to withdraw. Let's use a console write here because we want user to provide the amount exactly on the same line where this message is displayed. And well, here we have a few other errors. It's withdraw. Let's check once again. This withdraw returns true or returns false, so this should theoretically work now, but the only thing is we have forgotten here a semicolon, of course, and this solves a lot of issues. And the next thing is we can add also a break condition, so we know that after we execute this we have to stop. Right now the only squiggly line that remains is on this withdraw method, because when we call this withdraw method we also need to provide the amount. So let's provide it because we just got it from the user, and right now everything should be okay. However, we could implement here some further logic, because the idea is, we know that this transaction could also go wrong. And if the transaction goes wrong, maybe we simply want to show to the user a certain message, but if the transaction goes well, we want to display to the user another message. What we can do here is, of course, use another if statement, because we can nest an if statement in a switch statement. So the condition that we would have to evaluate here is this withdraw variable. So we know that if the transaction was correct or was successful, this withdraw variable would be set to true. So in this case we can simply console write line and write here some information. Maybe also use some string interpolation, and we can inform the user transaction successful, and maybe we want to also display the new balance. Your current or your new balance is, and then we simply display account and the property balance, which should be now changed because we have withdrawn something. And then we have to write an else statement And in this else statement, of course, we have to print a message to the user in case that the transaction was not successful. So we just can go with console write line here, and we can simply say insufficient funds. So that's it. Let's try this out to see exactly if this works. So we run this program. We have to provide a PIN. We make sure that we provide the correct one. And in this case, I want to withdraw, and I want to withdraw 78.45. Here I received the message: the transaction was successful. Your new balance is 510.89. So you can see that the balance is already the new one, because the original balance was 589, I think, and something. So this transaction was successful. Let's test the other scenario where we provide a sum or an amount that is greater than what our current deposit is. So we choose 2 for withdraw, and here let's provide $600, and in this case you see that we get the message insufficient funds. So the application is performing correctly till now. What we still need to do is implement a case for this third option when the user wants to deposit something. Let's go back to the bank account and check once again if we want to deposit. What we get as return would be simply the new balance. So let's go back to the program.cs and implement a new case for 3. So case 3. Here what we want to do is also, let's go back, we shouldn't leave that much space there. We should also console.write. Here we need, please specify the amount to deposit, and the user would have to specify a certain amount here. Of course, what we need to do is simply get that or read that amount from the console. So we could also use a double variable. We call it once again amount. This would be equal to double parse and console.readline, because we read this from the console. So that's it. Right now we have the amount. As a next step, what we can do is simply here is something not okay. Okay, we have, it's already used, so let's use amount 2, because of course we have the name amount already here, and we are in the same code block, so we cannot have variables that have the exact same name. Now, as a next step, of course, we would have to get the double, let's call it new balance, because here we want to run that method on account. So account.deposit and the amount that we just calculated or read from the console. Of course, we need to calculate amount 2, which it is okay. And we know that what happens right now is that after this action or this method will get executed, what we will have here is a new balance of type double that represents the new balance that we have on our current account. So what we can do here is simply display a message. Therefore, we will use a console write line. In this message, we can simply just return the new balance. Your new balance, and here account, or we can simply use this new balance variable that we already defined here. Of course, we need to also end this with a break. Good. So right now we have implemented all these cases. Now, as a best practice is that in a switch statement we also have a default, and in this default maybe we just can simply console.write line if user specifies something that we do not have in our menu. Option is not valid. So at least the user should know that the option that the user provided is not a valid option, and we also have to use a break, and everything should work right now. So let's run the application once again. In this case, we will provide a PIN that is correct. We will choose 3. Here, please specify the amount to deposit. Let's deposit 41.10, and our new balance is 630.44, which is correct. Now we can run the application one more time. To check another thing, we have to provide a PIN, of course, and then let's maybe choose 7. And we see here the option is not valid, and the program exits. So this is a very basic implementation of an ATM program where we are able to work with a certain bank account, check if the PIN for that bank account is correct, and then perform certain actions like check the balance, withdraw money, or deposit money to the current bank account, and so on. And of course here we have a very basic implementation, but this is, I would say, that the first real logical program that we have built together, using also classes, but also building on things that we have learned previously in this training, like how to work with condition statements, how to print things to the console, how to read different values from the console, and how to perform certain types of action based on the input that we get from the console. Right now, I think that's enough for now. I strongly encourage you to play around with classes to build similar applications to this one by yourselves. You can find on the internet a lot of great ideas, but the really important thing is, if you really want to become a software developer, you have to play with it. You have to get your hands dirty. You have to write code, a lot of code, because this is the way you get accustomed with the syntax, with how you define a class, how you work with properties, how you use if statements or switch statements, and so on. Thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, I wish you the very best.